Thomas, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. We're going to talk about something that I think most people in this room are probably traumatized by if you're in the Bitcoin mining space. Just by show of hands, has anybody reached out to What's Miner or Bitmain and made suggestions on how they could improve their products? I would say by show of hands, but you'd all be showing me your middle finger. What response did you get? Nothing. It is an absolute privilege to have you here. We're going to talk about user-centered design, which is alien to the mining landscape. But I want to start, and I want to make sure people really understand who you are and what is this mindset? What is this user-centered design mindset? So could you introduce us to who you are and maybe a little bit about maybe how you got into this space and help us sort of tease out what are the questions we even ask? How do we even start to understand products? And you've touched so many different products that many of us use every single day.
Maybe I could start with so my background's in engineering, hardware engineering. After school, I went to Silicon Valley, and I spent about a decade in semiconductors. After that, Apple started working on their iPhone, and I went over there and worked on early iPhone for a little while, and then Jack called, and Square was a startup.
You're already blowing my socks off. Could we rewind a little bit? What does it mean to work on early Apple?
Yeah, so I was working in semiconductors, and Apple. So interesting fact: the first iPhone. So Apple does everything in house, like they just down to the screw, the VHB or the tape. Like everything is designed in house, which is pretty crazy. But the first iPhone, the camera actually wasn't designed in house, and it was a pretty shitty camera. If you guys had the first iPhone, and they recognized this early on, but they should make their own camera.
Wow.
And so they recruited a small team of people to figure out how do they make a camera that is really small but still gives a really high performance. So yeah, so I didn't know anything about cameras, but I knew semiconductors.
Wow.
And so I joined a small team early days to figure out how how Apple can make cameras differently. And I think at the time it was very different than anybody else made it. So we had worked with custom equipment. Like we would scour the world for the equipment that isn't used for cameras, but high precision, material suppliers, processes, yeah, and so we made our own camera, and that's how I got into it. And then it was interesting. Then everything started having cameras, which was fun for me because I was on the iPhone team, but then the iPod came out, or the iPod decided, hey, we're gonna have a camera, and then the iPad came out, and then iPad should have a camera, and then MacBooks the camera need to get better, and so I was in a pretty good situation because I was able to see the entire roadmap of Apple at one time, which not a lot of people saw back then. Yeah.
So you literally started your career at the focal point of innovation in a product that was exploding, a product category where new categories were being added.
Yep.
And then you get tapped on the shoulder by Jack Dorsey and decide to go somewhere else.
Yeah. So what happened was, it's shocking how few people worked on the iPhone in the early days, but it started to explode, and the team started to get bigger. And I really like startups and small teams, and so it was starting to get big, a little more. I say big company, but the iPhone team was insulated within Apple, so it felt like a very small company, but it started getting big. At the time, Jack was like, "Hey, I'm starting this company. It's small. We're going to make a little white reader." And it was an opportunity to work on something new and build out a team and anything.
And then you built what?
So we started with the little white reader that you probably all see at farmers markets, plug into the audio jack. The first ones were terrible. I don't know how many people had them, but
I had one. It wasn't good.
It worked. Like you swiped it and like it was like a 30% success rate. It was terrible. And yeah, so we started with the reader, but we always had bigger ambitions than just a little white reader. Over the years, we built out a portfolio of products on the Square side that has point of sale. We have the one that works with that. We had the first iPad-based register. We worked with Apple on that, and then we have our own registers next door. You see the registers at two displays, terminals, and it's grown a portfolio of products.
Can we just get a round of applause for this? You don't have the modern world unless you have a Thomas Templeton and team. This is preface because we get to now unpack something that is alien to all of us Bitcoin miners, which is what happens when builders listen to you. What is this skill set where does it come from? How do you do it? What makes a good Square reader or a bad Square reader? You've gone from the premier communication device and the phone to now the premier ability to process payments, and it's in a beautiful format. It's something that's easy to use. It wasn't perfect the first time. What does that conversation look like? Because this is the conversation that it feels now that I'm sure you'll get into, we're bringing to the Bitcoin mining space. How do you start that conversation? How do you work through and navigate what's real, what's not real, what's important, what's not important?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with listening, right? Listening to customers. It was at Apple, we were all our own customers. We designed what we wanted, right? It was easy. But at Square, we weren't small businesses, and so it required an extra effort to go and talk to businesses, listen, understand pain points, right? And I think the question we ask is really around what are your pain points, not what do you want, right? And I think we have a set of tools in our toolbox, and we can all work on those pain points. But it really starts with listening and getting feedback and iterating on what are your pain points and how we can uniquely solve those pain points.
Could you give us examples of some of these, oh crap, how did we not think of this type conversations? Because what I'm hearing for you is you go to people and you don't say, what do you want?
Yeah.
You say, what hurts? And then you have to sort around it. Are there any sort of unlocked moments that you've picked up over the course of your career that have either been kind of like, oh, geez, we should have been doing that, or, oh, actually, we hadn't considered that?
Uh, I don't think so, and I think I say that because the people who live and breathe this every day, like they're the experts. They know best. And I think going into it with preconceived notions like this is how it should be or this is what we think we want it to be, you're not going to arrive at the best solution, right? And so I think it comes with an open mind and listening to the experts on what they're seeing, what they're dealing with every day. We can have in-house in our own lab and we can play around with and play cashier. You do that for an hour or two, it's not the same as living and breathing it. So I think the biggest thing is just having an open mind and being humble enough to know that you're not the expert. Like you're not the person that knows everything, and to listen and listen what people care about.
You should be able to bill insurance because I imagine the second that you start calling miners, it's like a therapy session. What were those initial conversations like? What are people telling you when you are going into the mining space and saying, I want to apply this first principles thinking to Bitcoin mining? No assumptions. Let's hear people's pain points. What do you hear? What surfaces immediately?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we wanted a pretty, I mean, mining is very diverse, right? And so we wanted a very diverse set of inputs. And so we talked to big miners, small miners, spent time with Eric and Philip in East Africa, out in West Texas, big miners. We talked to executives, purchasers, fleet managers, spent a lot of time with technicians. I think it's important to get a holistic view because everybody brings unique insight and perspective. And so we started with a big holistic view, but there were some very common themes, right? Around quality, durability, repairability, all the abilities, right? Like you can't like, and just the lack of understanding, and to your point about first principles, like we went back and we started asking the question why, like why is it this way? I think when I created the team, I mean, and we did this early days of Square, is that I think the first 150 people at Square had zero payment expertise, like
Wow.
not payments people at all. Like I wasn't paying for no one with payments, and that was intentional. And I think and the reason why it was intentional is because you can come to it with ignorance, right? And just ask the why. Why is it always done that way? And so when we created the Bitcoin initiatives, obviously you have deep Bitcoin expertise and mining expertise, but we wanted to also complement that with folks who didn't have mining expertise or didn't have Bitcoin expertise, because you ask the question, like, why does it have to be shaped like a shoebox? Like, why do you have to throw everything out, which is perfectly good components when you want to upgrade, right? Why do you have to do this? Like, why do you have to take it off the rack to repair it, right? You ask these questions because I think a lot of people and this isn't just unique to mining, but generally speaking, you just assume like this the way it's always done, and there's some false limitations, right? And so I think stepping back, going back to first principles and just asking why. And I tell like new employees all the time, it's like the biggest contribution, you bring unique perspective and background, just ask why. Like why? Because I think most of the time you're going to find the answer is, I don't know. We've always done it that way. Occasionally you find, okay, it's a really good reason why we do that. But oftentimes it's an opportunity to really challenge and make something better, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing, is just questioning and asking why.
One thing I thought was so impressive about the announcement, you did this beautiful announcement where you're showing people the hardware, you're walking them through the stack. If you're in attendance who've not seen it, it's online, it's beautiful, everything is perfectly put together. There's a bunch of folks here who were actually there just by show of hands, folks who were actually at the announcement. It was beautifully put together, and you introduced a really interesting idea that a lot of folks hadn't heard before, which was this idea of the miner as infrastructure. You go, miner as infrastructure? What are these guys talking about? In my mind, that was like an unlock. That was unbelievable because a lot of people had been looking at these bread boxes and going, "Yeah, it's a bread box. I use it. It breaks. I throw it out." Take us into why the infrastructure language, the organization, the way that you put this idea together is different or better. Because to me, that was the most striking thing. That's what I thought was really, wow, they've really unlocked something that people hadn't been asking for, but not asking for because they didn't know they could have it that way.
Yeah, I think when you go back to like when miners upgrade, what are you upgrading? Like, why are you upgrading? And I mean, most of the time, it's not because you want a better fan or a better power supply. It's because you want the new chip, right? You want the new ASIC that basically is the chip. You want the new chip that is more performant, right? And so when you step back and you think about it, like from fresh eyes, fresh perspective, you say, okay, that's the miner. Like the chip is the thing that's mining. Everything else, like why does infrastructure start here and stop here? Like who decides or who decided that this is what a miner is, the power supply and the fans? Like who decided that? Right? And to us, it didn't make sense that like there's some parts that in the industry deems infrastructure and some parts they don't. But when you look at it and say like, why is a PSU, why is that not infrastructure? It's just a simple question. And there wasn't a good answer.
One thing you've also done that's very interesting is this open source element too, that you've been really open to supporting the community. How does that play a role into what you build? Do you get feedback from individuals that are tinkering with it? Does that become part of your core design? How does that continue to evolve the product?
Yeah, I think it goes back to why we started Proto. Rod mentioned at a block, we do a lot of stuff in Bitcoin. We believe like Bitcoin should be everyday money, and we have lots of initiatives across all of our businesses aimed at that goal. And we have a small group of us that we call Bitcoin Core that we talk a lot about. Like, hey, how can we help? What are the biggest problems in Bitcoin, and where are we uniquely positioned to help? One of the things before we started Proto, one of the things was mining and centralization was a big thing. And so the whole reason we got into that was to help with the decentralization. And the reason I bring that up is because I think the biggest way we can help with this is open source, talking to the community, giving tools and access to folks, right? Like Scott's panel earlier, I think is great. And there's so many brilliant people in this space that I think are limited by their access. And I think if we can provide tools, of course the chips, documentation, reference design, software. If we can provide tools, I think that's the way we accomplish decentralization. It's not Block or Proto decentralizing Bitcoin. That's not going to happen, right?
That's right.
And so I think our biggest, like, of course, there's big miners, and they want machines as well, and there's quality issues on the big scale. But I think the way we really decentralize mining is, providing the tools and letting 1,000 flowers bloom. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Thinking specifically about the tools that you've invested so much time in building, building the whole stack, and seeing now, I I would challenge anyone in the audience, all of us, to have guessed a year and a half ago what would be happening in the mining space today. I don't think anybody would have guessed what's happening today. There's really this kind of phase shift that folks are undergoing as all the publicly traded companies are now beginning to adopt a lot of this AI HPC mentality. It's really radically changing the face of Bitcoin mining in a way that it's kind of hard to estimate where things are going. How do you see the tools that you have been working on and building, the technology stack, any of it? How does that play into the future? We can't know the future, but do you see opportunities where it can begin to play a role, maybe changing the face of the network and helping that decentralization you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, being totally candid, I think it's the people in this room, it's the people in the community that are really going to define that. It's not going to be Proto. It's not going to be a product team. Like, it's not going to be me that's going to define that. And so I think what we can do is, again, just provide the tools and then listen and feedback. What are you missing? What do you need? I mean, we have hot tub water heaters. I mean, we have a mining development kit that we released, and there's so many different use cases that come out of it. I mean, there's a guy doing a greenhouse, a miner up in Canada, bathhouse in New York. There's so many things that we will never think of, and so I think the biggest thing for us is providing tools and listening. Like, what else do you need? And obviously the chip, but what else? Is it reference designs? Is it like we have the software, we have an open source software? What are the things about this? What can we do? What are our skill sets and how we can help enable people and let the community decide where we're going to go? I think if we as in Proto try to decide what's going to happen, we're going to be wrong.
It's very rare that you get folks that are coming with decades upon decades of experience that move into a new space, and the first thing they say is, "Hey, I want to help the community. How can we just be another player in the space?" So I think there's a massive kudos to be given to Proto, to Block, to the entire team for having maintained that ethos of wanting to communicate and listen. How do folks get involved? Is it the case that they start soliciting feedback, they buy a product and they tell you how it runs, they're a developer and they wanna start poking around in a Git repo? What are the best ways to continue this conversation? Or do you just want to jump into the 256 chat and start chopping it up while the guys are assembling boards just in the back?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say, like, Block is a for-profit company, right? And we can, like, Bitcoin helps Block as a company, right? Every aspect of our business. If Bitcoin is successful, it helps us, right? And so we're not doing this just because we're good guys and we're doing it for ourselves. We're doing it because we believe in Bitcoin, and so that's why we work all across the stack. It's like being successful will ultimately help us, right, and help our shareholders. I guess your question around like how people can get involved, I think. And similar to how we got involved in mining is, like, we look at our unique assets, right? Like we had a very large hardware development team of engineers and designers, and we actually made our own ASICs for payments at the time. And we looked at it and said, "Okay, we're uniquely positioned to help in the hardware mining space." But I think every person's unique, and if you're a software engineer and you want to build software, or if you're a mechanical engineer and you want to work on systems, like, I think it comes down to, like, the advice I would give is figure out where you're passionate and you have some expertise, and just dive in and learn. And you're going to make a ton of mistakes, and it's going to be frustrating at first, but little by little, you'll start to show that you actually are making progress. And I think like, when I first got into Bitcoin, like, the community is, like, a lot smaller than I thought, and there's a small amount of builders, and it's such a welcoming community. So I think people are a little intimidated at first, but once you get into it, you realize, like, this community is great, and it's not like anything else.
You get in where you fit in.
Yeah.
Who here has a degree in Bitcoin? And it's the few, the proud. Big shout out to Ella. Actually, the only. It's going to be a shame when we sit here, God willing, in 30, 40, 50 years, and people do have degrees in Bitcoin and mining and core development and all these things, and we're going to look like a bunch of old fuddy-duddies who are just tooling around having the time of our lives. That being said, can we get a massive, massive round of applause to Thomas Templeton? Please continue to do what you do, and continue building amazing products and amazing teams.